There are calls in baseball that everyone forgets by the following morning. A close play at second base that goes one way instead of another. A checked swing that the first base umpire rules differently than the batter expected. A foul ball that grazes the line and is called fair, resulting in a single instead of an out, changing one at-bat in one inning of one game that will ultimately have no bearing on anything that matters. Those calls come and go. They generate 30 seconds of argument, a brief managerial appearance at home plate, and then disappear into the vast archive of baseball moments that nobody remembers a week later. And then there are calls like this one. Calls that don't disappear. Calls that crack open a conversation so large, so fundamental, so threaded through with questions about fairness and consistency and the integrity of the rulebook that governs this sport, calls that the baseball world is still arguing about days later, with no sign of the argument slowing down. What happened in that game involving Shohei Ohtani was one of those calls. A ball hit to the outfield. A ruling from the umpires. And a result that had former players, current coaches, rules analysts, and fans across the country asking the same question simultaneously, in the same incredulous tone. Did Major League Baseball just break its own rules to hand Shohei Ohtani a Little League home run? Or, and this is where the story becomes genuinely complicated, genuinely interesting, and genuinely worth understanding in full, did they actually follow the rulebook exactly as written, in a way that almost nobody in the sport bothers to learn until a moment like this forces them to? The answer is not the one most people expect. And it starts not with the play itself, but with the rule that almost no one reads until it matters. First, the terminology, because the phrase Little League home run carries a specific meaning in baseball that gets lost in the noise of controversy. A Little League home run, in the professional context, refers to an inside-the-park situation where the ball remains in play but a series of errors, misplays, or specific ground rule circumstances allow the batter to circle all four bases and score. The name is affectionate and slightly dismissive simultaneously. It implies that the home run was not earned through the pure, clean violence of a ball launched over the fence, but rather scrambled for, gifted by circumstance, accumulated through the chaos of a play gone wrong. In the major leagues, this type of ruling most commonly appears in a specific situation, when a batted ball bounces into the stands, rolls under a fence, or becomes lodged in an outfield wall or barrier. In these cases, the umpires are required to apply what the rulebook calls an automatic two-base award, meaning the batter and any runners advance exactly 2 bases from their position at the time of the pitch. The rule exists for a specific reason. When a ball enters an unplayable situation, when it disappears into the stands or becomes physically inaccessible to the fielding team through no fault of the defense, it would be unfair to allow base runners to advance indefinitely while fielders scramble. The two-base award creates a standardized outcome. It removes the chaos. It applies the same result every time the same situation occurs. In theory, it is one of the clearest rules in baseball. In practice, on the day that Shohei Ohtani came to bat, it became the most argued rule in the sport. The at-bat itself had the quality that all of Ohtani's significant moments carry, a sense that something is about to happen, that the atmosphere in the ballpark has shifted slightly, that the pitcher standing 60 feet away is aware, on some level, that the margins for error are different than they are with other hitters. The pitch came in. Ohtani swung. The contact was not what anyone would describe as vintage Ohtani, not the kind of authoritative, full-extension collision between bat and ball that sends the baseball into genuine orbit and removes all doubt about what has occurred. This was something harder to classify. A ball hit with authority but at an angle, toward the right center gap, carrying enough distance to challenge the outfielder but not enough to make the fence a certainty. The outfielder moved. He tracked it. He reached. And then, in the specific, chaotic, unrepeatable way that baseball produces its most controversial moments, the ball did something that nobody on the field had fully anticipated. It struck the top of the wall at an angle that sent it caroming back onto the field in one instant and, in the next, made contact with the padding along the base of the fence in a way that caused it to wedge. Or bounce into the stands. Depending on which camera angle you were watching and which umpire you were asking. That disagreement, between angles, between officials, between the people standing 20 feet from the play and the people watching it on screens in living rooms across the country, is where the controversy was born. The umpires conferred. The conference lasted long enough that both managers had walked onto the field before it concluded. And when the ruling came, it came with the particular clarity of an announcement that has been carefully chosen and is about to generate immediate and sustained disagreement. Two-base award. Automatic. Ohtani, who had been running from the moment of contact, was placed at second base. The runners advanced accordingly. Given Ohtani's position on the bases at the time of the pitch, the two-base award placed him, and a preceding runner, in scoring position in a way that the next at-bat converted into runs. Runs that, when the final score was tallied, turned out to matter. The internet did not wait for the final score to begin its verdict. The fury came from multiple directions simultaneously, which is how you know a baseball controversy has genuinely landed. The first wave came from fans of the opposing team, who argued, with video evidence they believed was conclusive, that the ball had not lodged in the fence or bounced into the stands. That it had, in fact, struck the wall and remained on the field in playable condition. That the outfielder, given a moment of additional pursuit, could have retrieved it. That the two-base award had been applied to a situation that did not qualify for it, and that the runs which followed were therefore the product not of Ohtani's hitting or his team's base running, but of an incorrect ruling by umpires who either misidentified what they saw or were too far from the play to see it clearly. The second wave came from a different direction entirely, from former players and analysts who argued that even if the ruling was technically correct, the optics of applying it in this specific situation, involving this specific player, in a game with these specific stakes, demanded a higher standard of review. That replay should have been used. That the call should not have stood without a challenge being upheld by clear and convincing evidence. The third wave, quieter, more measured, but in many ways the most interesting, came from the people who had actually read the rulebook. Who pulled up the specific section governing automatic two-base awards and read it carefully and then said something that surprised everyone who was busy being furious: the umpires might have been right. Rule 5.05a(8) of the official baseball rules covers the automatic two-base award in detail that most fans, and many players, have never encountered. The rule specifies that a batter becomes a runner entitled to two bases when a fair ball bounces into the stands, passes through or under a fence, or becomes lodged in a fence or wall. The key language, the language that the umpires were applying and that the critics were disputing, is becomes lodged. Not lodged permanently. Not lodged in a way that is visible and unambiguous from every angle. Lodged in the sense that the ball's contact with the barrier created a situation where normal fielding retrieval was interrupted or prevented. The interpretation of that language has been debated in umpiring circles for years. What does lodged mean precisely? How long does the interruption need to last? How clearly does the ball need to be visually separated from the playable field for the rule to apply? These are not new questions. They are questions that arise in similar situations several times per season, in games that do not involve Shohei Ohtani, and are resolved by umpires in real time without generating national controversy. The calls are made. Some are challenged. Most are upheld. The game moves on. What is new, what the Ohtani situation introduced into this familiar argument, is the scale of the audience watching and the name attached to the beneficiary of the ruling. Because here is the uncomfortable truth that the rulebook reveals when you actually read it: what the umpires called was not, by the letter of the rule as written, obviously wrong. It was a judgment call made in real time by officials standing near the play, applying a rule that contains inherent interpretive flexibility, in a situation that the available camera angles did not resolve with complete clarity. Was it the right call? Reasonable people, looking at the same evidence, reached different conclusions. That is precisely the kind of call that has always existed in baseball and always will, calls where the rule is clear but the facts on the ground are not. Here is the part of the story that nobody wants to say directly but everyone is thinking. If this exact play, same ball, same wall, same camera angles, same conference between umpires, same ruling, had occurred with a different batter at the plate, a journeyman outfielder or a utility infielder in the middle of an unremarkable season, the controversy would have lasted approximately 4 hours. It would have generated a segment on one baseball analysis show, a handful of tweets from people who follow umpiring decisions closely, and then faded completely. The reason this controversy has not faded, the reason it continues to generate heat, to circulate through baseball media, to produce takes and counter-takes and responses to counter-takes, is the name attached to the beneficiary of the ruling. Shohei Ohtani exists in a category of athletic celebrity where everything that happens to him, around him, or even tangentially near him becomes amplified to a degree that defies normal sports media logic. He is not simply the best player in baseball. He is the player around whom a narrative has been constructed, by media and fans and the sport's own marketing apparatus, that makes his every achievement feel either miraculous or suspicious depending on who is telling the story. When Ohtani hits a home run in the traditional sense, ball over fence, no ambiguity, no rulebook required, it is celebrated as confirmation of everything the narrative claims about him. When something like this happens, a ruling that benefits him, that is technically defensible but visually messy, that required a conference and a decision and a level of interpretive judgment, the same narrative flips. Suddenly the question is not whether the call was right. The question is whether the sport itself is arranging things in his favor. That is an unfair question. It is also an inevitable one. Because that is what happens when one player becomes large enough to cast a shadow over the rulebook itself. Major League Baseball did not break its own rules to give Shohei Ohtani a Little League home run. The umpires applied a rule that exists in the official rulebook, in a situation that, while visually ambiguous, contained enough evidence for the officials present to make the call they made. Reasonable disagreement about the call is legitimate. The outcome affected the game. That is genuinely significant and genuinely worth discussing. What this moment reveals about baseball in 2025 is something worth sitting with. The sport has a rulebook that most of its fans, and, honestly, many of its players, do not fully understand. It has situations that arise regularly where that rulebook requires interpretation, judgment, and real-time decision-making by officials who are human and fallible and doing their best under conditions of pressure and imperfect information. And it has, at its center right now, a player so singularly large that every one of those judgment calls, when it touches him, becomes a referendum not just on the specific play but on the sport's integrity, its consistency, its relationship with its own rules. That is an extraordinary amount of weight for one ruling to carry. It is also, in its way, a measure of something remarkable, the degree to which Ohtani has become not just the face of his team or his era, but the lens through which the sport itself is now examined. The Little League home run that wasn't quite a home run and wasn't quite a rule violation will be forgotten eventually. The broader question it raised, about how baseball applies its rules, who benefits when interpretation is required, and what it means to play the game fairly when the rulebook itself contains ambiguity, will not be forgotten nearly as quickly. Because in baseball, as in everything, the most important arguments are never really about the specific moment that started them. They are about everything the moment reveals.